It started with a photograph. Not a famous one, not a historic one, just a photograph of his daughter, taken as you do at Christmas. The year was 1975, and the man holding the camera was no one. A mid-level engineer at a mid-level company, the kind of man who sat in beige cubicles and attended meetings no one remembered. On paper, he was simply paid to solve problems, not to invent the future, not to threaten the present, certainly not to do both at once. But there was something about that photograph, something that wouldn't leave him alone. He had a question, a small, apparently foolish question, the kind that polite people don't ask out loud at large companies, the kind that sensible managers quietly discourage. He asked it anyway. What if you didn't need the film? That was it. That was the whole thing. Not a revolution, not a manifesto. Just, what if you didn't need the film? He went back to his desk. He started tinkering. The company he worked for was not a small one. It was, at the time, the undisputed king of its industry. 100-year-old empire built on one elegant premise. People want to remember things, and to remember things they need us. The company's name was synonymous with the product. Its revenues were staggering, its margins were extraordinary, its confidence was absolute. The word untouchable would not have been out of place. The engineer did not think about any of that. He thought about circuits. He thought about sensors. He thought about charge-coupled devices and light and pixels. He thought about a photograph without film. In December of 1975, after months of quiet work, he built something no one had built before. A camera, but not a camera. A device the size of a toaster, held together with scotch tape and borrowed components. It captured an image, a digital image, stored not on film, but on a cassette tape. It was crude. It was impractical. It was by any conventional standard a toy, and it was the most dangerous object in the building. He brought it to his managers. He walked through the door, the way junior engineers always do. Slightly too eager, slightly too certain, carrying a prototype that will change everything, and a presentation that does not yet know how to say so. He explained what he had built. He explained what it meant. He explained, slowly, carefully, that this was the beginning of something that could transform how the world takes pictures. The managers listened. They nodded. They were not unimpressive men. They had run the numbers. They understood the technology, or at least, they understood enough of it. And then they told him the truth. Their truth. The quiet, devastating, absolutely reasonable truth. This could hurt film sales. That was the assessment. Not, this is impossible. Not, this will never work. Just, this will hurt film sales. And film sales were the company. Film was the margin. Film was the dividend. Film was the answer to every question the shareholders ever asked. The engineer's prototype was not rejected because it failed. It was shelved because it succeeded. So they buried it. The report went into a drawer. The prototype was catalogued and classified. Internally, of course. The project was assigned to a small, underfunded team, given just enough resources to continue, but not enough to matter. Kept alive in the way large companies keep inconvenient ideas alive, at a pace slow enough to feel like progress, and fast enough to claim ownership. For years, the technology was theirs, fully developed, fully understood, fully suppressed, and the world kept buying film. It is worth pausing here, because what happened next was not dramatic. There was no single villain, no memo that said, "Destroy this," no midnight shredding of documents, just the ordinary, comfortable weight of an industry that had no interest in disrupting itself. Decision by committee, budget cycle by budget cycle, quarter by quarter. The engineer's device sat in the archive. The company sat on top of it. And the gap between what they had and what they were doing with it grew wider every year. The competitors were not standing still. The Japanese electronics companies had their own engineers, their own questions, their own quiet cubicles full of men with inconvenient ideas. And they had no film business to protect. By the mid-1990s, consumer digital cameras were beginning to appear. Clumsy, expensive, inferior in almost every way to the company's own internal research, but in the market, breathing, growing, and the engineer watched. He had spent a year of his life on that toaster-sized machine. He had stood in a boardroom and explained the future with the careful patience of a man who believed, genuinely believed, that the people in front of him would see what he saw. They had seen it. That was the thing. They understood every word. They simply chose differently. Now he watched competitors sell inferior versions of his own invention, watched the industry. He had tried to warn, scramble to catch up with technology it already owned. Watched a 100-year empire begin, slowly and then all at once, to crack. The company entered the digital market. Eventually. It built digital cameras. Eventually. It acknowledged that film was dying. Eventually. But eventually in business is just another word for too late. By 2012, the bankruptcy filing landed. 130 years. Gone. And somewhere in the archive, untouched, was the original report. The prototype specifications. The presentation from December 1975. The one that started with a photograph of a little girl at Christmas. Now, here is what I want you to consider. The man who built that device was 24 years old. 24. He had been handed the assignment almost as an afterthought. Small project, low priority. Go see if anything comes of this sensor component we acquired. He had no mandate to change the world, no title that suggested he would. He was, by every organizational measure, a footnote. And yet, what he built in that year, the circuits, the sensors, the cassette tape, the 8-pound machine that took 23 seconds to capture a single black and white image, was the seed of an industry now worth hundreds of billions of dollars. Every photograph on every phone in every pocket on the planet traces a line back to that device, back to that question, back to that Christmas photograph. The empire that buried his invention is gone. The invention itself is everywhere. You have used it today, almost certainly. History remembers the company. It remembers the collapse. It remembers the cautionary tale about disruption and denial and the cost of comfort. But it has been quieter about the engineer, the 24-year-old in the beige cubicle, the one who asked the foolish question, the one who built the dangerous toy, the one who walked into that boardroom and told them clearly exactly what was coming, and was thanked and filed away along with his prototype He was eventually recognized, decades later, with one of the highest honors his country gives to inventors, presented by a president in a ceremony at the White House. By that point, the company that owned his work suppressed his work and ultimately failed to act on his work, was already in bankruptcy proceedings. The hidden detail was never the camera. It was the man behind it, the one nobody thought to remember, the one who saw the future first and was told politely to put it back in the drawer. But before I tell you his name, before I tell you the company, I need you to understand what that company was. Because you already know it. You just don't know you know it yet. This was not some obscure industrial footnote. This was not a company that existed in boardrooms and balance sheets, invisible to ordinary people. This company was in your home, in your family albums, at your parents' wedding, at your grandparents' wedding. For most of the 20th century, if a moment was worth remembering, this company was how the world remembered it. First birthdays, the moon landing, school photographs, soldiers shipping out, soldiers coming home. Their film was in the camera for almost every defining image of the last 100 years. They did not just sell a product. They sold something far more valuable than a product. They sold the idea that ordinary moments deserved to last forever. That your life, your specific, unremarkable, irreplaceable life, was worth capturing. They had a slogan, 4 words, and those 4 words entered the language so completely that people forgot they were ever advertising. They became just the way people described a moment too good to lose, a Kodak moment. That was the empire. That was what was sitting in the room in December of 1975, when a 24-year-old engineer walked in carrying a toaster-sized machine and a question nobody wanted to answer. That is what makes the choice so devastating. Not stupidity, not malice, something quieter than either. A company so dominant for so long that it had lost the ability to imagine the world without itself at the center of it. It looked directly at what was coming. It understood exactly what it was looking at. And it chose comfort. The engineer's name was Stephen Sasson, and the company was Kodak. A single engineer, a toaster-sized machine, a cassette tape, and a room full of very smart people asking the wrong question. I made a veil, and that was the hidden detail.